Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy, is playing fast and loose brinkmanship with the U.S. debt ceiling. Knowing that it could cause serious problems for the economy, he seems to not care. Here's a few things that could happen. If the government were to default on its debts, it would have a significant impact on the economy and the average citizen's financial well-being. Here are some of the things that will happen if the House Republicans don't come to their senses soon. The default would trigger an economic recession, leading to a significant increase in unemployment rates, lower GDP, and higher inflation. This would have a direct impact on the average citizen's income, making it more difficult for them to make ends meet. A government default could cause turmoil in financial markets, leading to a significant drop in stock prices and other investments. This would have a significant impact on retirement savings of the American citizen, potentially causing them to lose a significant portion of their wealth. A default would lead to an increase in interest rates, making it more expensive for the average citizen to borrow money. This would impact mortgages, car loans, and other forms of credit, making it harder for the citizenry to purchase homes or invest in businesses. In the event of government default, the government would have less money to spend on programs and services. This could result in cuts to essential services such as healthcare, education, and infrastructure. The average citizen may see a reduction in the quality of those services, making it more challenging to access the services they need. A government default would have severe impact on the average citizen's financial well-being, potentially leading to economic hardship and decreased quality of life. It is essential for the government to work toward avoiding a default and finding solutions to address the government's debt and fiscal challenges. Another thing that could be adversely affected by a default is Social Security and the VA health system. Social Security is funded by payroll taxes, but the program also holds U.S. Treasury bonds as part of its trust fund. If the government defaults on its debt, it would cause the value of those bonds to plummet, potentially jeopardizing the solvency of the Social Security system. The government may have to cut benefits or increase taxes to make up for the lost revenue. The Department of Veterans Affairs operates the largest healthcare system in the United States, serving millions of veterans every year. If the government defaults on its debt, it could result in a decrease in funding for the VA, potentially leading to cuts in healthcare services and benefits for veterans. A default could have far-reaching consequences, not just to Social Security and the VA, but to the entire U.S. economy. The government's ability to manage its finances potentially could cause significant disruption of financial markets, both domestically and internationally. It would have significant and far-reaching effects on the U.S. and world economies in such ways as a default would cause a sharp and sudden sell-off of U.S. treasuries, which are considered the safest investments in the world. This would cause turmoil in the financial markets as investors rush to sell their holdings. This could lead to a decline in the value of the U.S. dollar as well as a rise in interest rates. The default would cause interest rates to rise as investors demand higher yields to compensate for the increased risk. This would make it more expensive for consumers and businesses to borrow money, which could lead to a slowdown in economic growth. A default could force the U.S. government to cut spending in order to reduce its debt burden. This could lead to reduced fundings for important programs like Social Security, Medicare, and education, which would negatively impact the quality of life for many Americans. It would also undermine confidence in the U.S. government's ability to manage its finances, which could lead to a loss of credibility and influence in global financial markets. This could also lead to a reduced willingness of foreign governments and investors to hold U.S. dollars and U.S. debt. The U.S. is the largest economy in the world, and default would trigger global economic contraction, as many other countries would feel the effects of the U.S.'s financial instability. This would lead to a slowdown in global trade and investments, which would have negative consequences for the world economy. Overall, a U.S. default on its sovereign debt would be a significant and potentially catastrophic event for the U.S. and world economies. It's in the best interest of all parties in such a scenario to ensure the U.S. government is able to service its debt obligation. People have in the past questioned whether the law is constitutional, as the Constitution says that the debt of the U.S. government shall always be paid. Well, the constitutionality of the debt limit law has been subject to some debate. As I said, the debt limit law, which is a statutory limit on the amount of debt the U.S. government can accumulate, was first enacted in 1917 as part of the Second Liberty Bond Act. The current Debt Limit Act is a revision of the Debt Limit Act of 1939, which has been changed over the years to account for inflation and increased government debt. Some legal scholars argue the debt limit law is unconstitutional because it violates the separation of powers by infringing on the executive branch's ability to carry out its constitutional duties. They argue that the power to spend money and borrow funds is explicitly granted to Congress by the Constitution, and the debt limit law impermissibly restricts the president's ability to carry out those functions. Ultimately, the question of whether the debt limit law is constitutional is a matter for the courts to decide. It has been challenged in the past, but all challengers have been citizens, holders of government bonds, who, for whatever reason, the courts have ruled do not have standing to bring the case before the courts. One would have to feel that they're saying that only the president or the executive could bring the matter before the courts for a final resolution as to whether the debt limit is constitutional or not. In the past, the debt limit was always raised as needed without any arguments. It has only been since 2011, during the Obama presidency, that the Republican House has made it difficult for the debt limit to be raised while a Democrat is in the president's office. Democratic Congresses have never had a problem with raising the debt limit while a Republican was in the White House. The situation needs to be rectified as quickly as possible and preferably for the long term.